Why did Nigeria waste over $10 billion on a steel mill that sat abandoned for 40 years? Now, this may be one of the most shocking stories of mismanagement ever, and it exposes one of the worst aspects of corruption and incompetency that has plagued many African governments for decades. The story begins in 1970. Having emerged victorious in the Nigerian Civil War with the aid of the Soviet Union, the country's federal military government began to adopt the Soviet model for Nigeria's post-war economy. State ownership of the means of production was officially confirmed in 1970 when Nigeria's military government decreed that the state would acquire and control the greater proportion of the productive assets of the country. But while Nigeria's government would go on to nationalize nearly half of the economy, virtually all of these state-run businesses would eventually exist to simply enrich corrupt government officials. And there's no better example of this than the Ajakuta steel mill. Originally intended to be one of the largest industrial projects in sub-Saharan Africa, the mill was supposed to produce over 2.6 million tons of steel in its first year of operation alone. There was just one problem: it never opened. Why? Well, because despite the government awarding a contract to build the site in 1976, a combination of corruption and incompetency has plagued the project to this very day. For starters, the mill ended up being built on a site that was so far away from Nigeria's iron mines that there was no practical way to actually get the iron to the mill. But not to worry. In 1987, more than 7 years after the mill was supposed to be completed, Nigeria's government decided to award a second government contract, this time to build a state-owned railroad connecting the mines to the mill. The government promised that this would take 5 years to complete, but what began as one act of gross government inefficiency and corruption soon became two, as the railroad sat abandoned and unfinished for decades. But the story doesn't end there. In a twist of irony, when the government finally brought in a foreign firm to complete the railroad in 2017, it was discovered that much of the abandoned railway track had been looted for its steel. Yet despite these setbacks, the railroad did finally open in 2020, more than 28 years behind schedule. But the mill itself still remains unfinished and still has not produced a single unit of steel, despite more than $10 billion being sunk into the project for more than 40 years. And since 1992, government officials have been telling the public that it would take hundreds of millions in additional taxpayer dollars to finally finish the project. The story of the Ajakuta steel mill is yet another example of the systematic habit of politicians and government officials to overpromise and underdeliver. Not to mention waste hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in bribes, kickbacks, and other forms of corruption. History has demonstrated time and again, no matter where it's tried, that government ownership of projects like these practically guarantees that they will be inefficiently constructed and operated. But throw in a dictatorship unaccountable to the people, combined with an economic system unaccountable to customers and investors, and you have yet another tragic story of the misuse of resources that was entirely avoidable.